We come to Operation Epic Fury. Bombs and missiles are raining down on Israel, the Gulf states, and Iran itself. We think America thought they could be all over, but I think everybody's realizing this is going to drag on and become an horrendous war. And all that time, having no oil, none of the chemicals we need for fertilizers, in a few months' time, we could be running out of oil and food prices could be rocketing up. What is this significance, Fred? What is this telling you with your long-term mind? Everybody knows that you can unpick these immediate complexities and give that long view of what's happened.
Well, I think it's time to pronounce, first of all, on the short-term view. In my view, we have now reached the peak in the property market. It's a complex interaction of a variety of forces, but what Trump is doing in Iran is the coup de grace. It wraps up all these many forces that are converging to bring an end to the business cycle and the house price cycle. So while some prices in some regions may go up a little bit here and there, which we will read about in the media, I'm afraid that elsewhere they will be going down, and the overall situation is one in which we've stalled. The global economy is stalled, and it's the domestic economies like the UK's and in Europe, they've also stalled, and house prices will not be going up any further. We are on the precipice with the decline beginning as from now, effectively. The really bad news, though, is that I think we can say with a high degree of confidence that we won't be recovering in the housing market in the way that we did in previous cycles. We are now entering a phase of protracted decline. Again, not for any one simple reason, but because, well, if one had to put a single word on it, it's the confidence of people in terms of their prospects, in terms of their economy's performance, the capacity of their governments to address the problems in their countries. All these effects are cumulative, and the outcome will be stasis, as it's called, paralysis in the global economy, and house prices will not recover in a couple of years' time as we might have expected them to have done so. The burden on governments is going to be enormous. Think about just the cost of taking communities away from the coastal regions that are being flooded and rebuilding communities along rivers that are subject to flooding. That will be an enormous cost that governments really can't afford, which takes us to the next problem. Where is the money coming from? The investors will be very cautious about lending governments money from now on. They've already started to withdraw from the loans to governments, the bond markets, and so on. And then, of course, there's the pressure of migration. The Iranian one has hardly begun, but it's going to become cumulative. But that's only one country. You mentioned the problem of food supply. That's going to hit Africa in a very bad way, which will drive yet more people north into Europe and Eastern Europe. And then, of course, we've got the interventions of the autocrats like Putin. He won't give up on his project in Ukraine. In fact, he will probably really be looking to make more trouble in Europe, as he already is doing covertly. And what with the intervention of China in relation to Formosa, what we've got is the perfect storm. So I'm afraid that we're not going to see the recovery in house prices. Well, I don't want to say never ever, but I wouldn't be counting on recovery in house prices for a very long time. Uh, that's where we are at the present time, and it's a grim future
Mm.
because while there is a way to tackle, to navigate this crisis, most people really don't want to know about the remedy, which because that means we've got to talk about the underlying cause of all these problems. And at the moment, people are so concerned with their present situation that they don't really want to know the fundamental cause of our crises, which leads to the fundamental solution, which would build a strength within society and therefore make it more capable of dealing with these pressures. So
Mm.
I'm afraid that until there is a shift in attitude of the public in general, of really wanting to know the fundamental answers, we're stuck with politicians who are throwing up panaceas, short term, ridiculous ideas that we know in advance will not work. And so the cumulative effect will be the worsening of the crisis.
Mm. We're now, from the news reports I see, especially around Australasia, Japan, um, Indonesia, that sort of places who rely on Gulf oil, they are starting to see queues and even rationing, where they're starting to say you can't drive cars on a certain day. That could tighten very quickly into real rationing, and we could see it, I think, in a couple of months, um, if things escalate. But when you look at the lead times to repair all these destroyed oil facilities, it could be 2, 3, 4 years to repair one of these gas terminals. So we're going to have this for a long, long time. So you say, Fred, we've got the immediate horrors of what's going on, but we've been building up to a horror of all this debt and all this money that has inflated asset values. And they come together now, and Trump has brought both issues together. It's only going to get worse and worse. So, any idea when this debt mountain based on inflated asset values is going to collapse?
We're seeing what I've been forecasting for some while, the convergence of
Mm.
all the individual problems. And as I think I've already said, there is no light at the end of the tunnel at the present time. And there is no light because people are resisting the idea that there might be a light at the end of the tunnel, because there can be no light unless enough individuals are willing to come to grips with the causes of the problem. So, the financial system, as you say, is dire. The money won't be available for the rapid restoration of the energy system. And on top of the fact that the supply of energy is being shrunk by the day, we are also seeing an increase in the demand for energy by the day from the digital sector, the artificial
Mm.
intelligence, their needs for the power to run the data centers, which we will be increasingly turning to by way of some kind of easy way to boost the economy, even if that means having to sack people so that we can have increase in productivity without having to pay wages.
Mm.
So it is a cumulative crisis, and we've reached the precipitating point. We're on the edge of the collapse into an abyss that nobody alive today, whether young or old, has seen. It's worse than what the people were viewing back in the 1930s or the beginnings of the Second World War. People alive then could imagine an end to the Depression or a world war. But with the convergence of all the problems that we have today, we can't begin to raise our hopes by visualizing how things can be restored to normality, because we're not willing to invest in the reconstruction of societies at the end of what is about to begin to happen from now on.
And of course, Fred, this is what you explore in your latest book, is how we talk about what the problem is. Your new book, about to be published in a few weeks, called Cheating, how this process of cheating, we're all cheating each other instead of getting on with doing productive things.
That's right, but nobody likes to be identified as being a cheat. There's the difficulty. It's a psychological problem. But while we preserve our wish to distance ourselves from reality, we will allow this system to get worse and worse. And who's going to suffer except each and every one of us? There's no escaping the consequences of what's happening. There's no part of the world that we can migrate to where we can hope to escape the environmental shifts in weather patterns, the shortage of resources to boost the economy. All of these things touch every part of our world today. And so I'm afraid that the way we articulate, as you say, the problems really does matter. Take, for instance, the migration problem. In Britain, we have a new political party called Reform, which says that, well, they'll solve the migration problem by cancelling membership of the European Convention of Human Rights. First of all, that will not stop the migrants. The pressures are so intense and will be far worse over the next few months into next year that the impetus for migration will not slow up. But here's the problem. Even the European Convention is a contributor to our problems, because nowhere in that convention is there any discussion about how, if you get human rights, you have to balance them with responsibilities. So since the 1950s, when we've been claiming human rights, chanting the phrase every day, every government must provide us with our human rights, we haven't had a parallel awareness of the need for the personal responsibilities that go with those rights. And so there needs to be a intellectual, a philosophical, a huge mental leap into a new domain where of enlightenment, where we can come to terms emotionally with the realities. And that hasn't begun yet. And I just fear that if events run away with themselves, it might be too late to even take a grip of them. Uh, I don't know. I'm going to be doing my best, as you are doing, to awaken people's awareness of the need to shift the mindset, the collective as well as the individual mindset. But we need a lot more people tutored into understanding the what are relatively simple ideas. The problem is not with the ideas; it's the emotional attachments that we have to the present or past that inhibits us from coming to terms with reality.
So what you're suggesting, Fred, is we need to have a serious look at maybe a European Convention on Human Responsibilities. We need a statue of responsibility, not just a statue of liberty. We can all have these liberties, we can all have these rights, but until we recognize the responsibilities we have to each other, every one of us has, and if we don't take those responsibilities seriously, we're creating the long term problems that have brought us to this point of collapse that we're facing.
Exactly. And you see, one of the tragedies is that our intellectuals, the academics in the universities, they are publishing many more books now about how to solve the world's problems, but they don't enter into a discussion about responsibilities. They only produce these figments of their imagination about how they could like to visualize the future as being better than what's been in the past. But they don't talk about, as you say, a convention on human responsibilities, because that would touch on a sensitive subject. It would start to move the conversation towards, well, what have we been doing wrong in the past? How did we get here? But not until we start asking those questions can we also start to come to terms with the solution, which follows naturally from talking about how we got here in the first place.
Mm.
So, yes, we need a European Convention on Social Responsibilities. Somebody has to write that convention. There are plenty of think tanks that are producing copious studies, but nobody is producing one on social responsibilities.
Absolutely. And as you've campaigned for, it is essentially this free riding on the back of the system, this collection of money that is not made by you, it's made by other people throughout all of our economic systems. And that has brought us. And in some ways, what I'm hearing from you is we're not just at the end of another 18-year business property cycle. We have a super cycle above one or two of those cycles. We could go back to the, late 70s with the rise of Margaret Thatcher, and that started saying it's all right to be greedy, it's all right to take money off other people, even though you didn't make it yourself. And we're going to be coming to the end of a multi 18-year cycle.
Yeah, we're coming to the end of a cycle that, or a phase in evolution that began with the recovery from the Second World War.
Mm.
Politicians optimistically thought that if they created something that resembled a welfare state, that would be the beginnings of a new kind of future. But no, it wasn't. It was absorbing the failures of what brought the world to two world wars, and it was just spending money to mitigate the problems that were created by the foundations, the rotten foundations of our social system. what the welfare state was not able to do was to override the causes, the fundamental root causes of what was creating, well, in one example, the 18-year property cycle. This is a boom bust that operated so consistently that it had to have its origins in the structure of the system. But the politicians and the academics were not willing to say, well, how do we terminate this cycle so that we can have stability, so that everybody can acquire a home that they can afford, have access to the jobs that they need, and fulfill their aspirations without these boom busts every 18 years. They just weren't asking those questions. And so, yes, you're right, Peter, that we're coming to the end of the post-war era, and what lies in the future doesn't hardly bear thinking about, except we'd better start thinking, because otherwise it's going to be a grotesque future.
So you've made the statement. Now we've reached the peak. Nothing's going to rise. The share prices aren't going to go up. The housing's not going to go up anymore. The commercial property is not going to go up anymore. And it is literally a house of cards, because there is no steady state in this system. It's either rising or it's falling. There's no plateau. And all the politicians get it wrong. They say, oh, we'll have a steady state. It'll even out. It doesn't work in our economic system. It's either boom or it's bust.
That's right. And of course, they keep using this word sustainability. They're going to produce these sustainable remedies, which they churn out in their copious reports. But there is no prospect of the policies or the strategies that they propose being sustainable, because the system automatically undermines any creative endeavor in order to soak up the net gains into the form of the unearned increments, which, alas, most of us help to capture in the form of capital gains on our homes. That's when people stop thinking, they stop listening, they switch off, because it's painful. It's a really difficult issue, and it's going to require a new enlightenment, assuming that we have the time and enough people stepping forward to drive that process, to force the kind of conversations that lead to the enlightenment that might generate the beginnings of a recovery.
Absolutely. We have to give the tools available for the recovery, but the crash is coming. I've just been speaking to my son at university, and he was saying, oh, he'll get the train back for Easter holidays because he doesn't think there might be any petrol for me to go and see him. That's how incredibly we think it's all silly, but things are going to get weird and nasty and dangerous. And we need people to be, we need things to keep the social fabric together, but we also need to give that hope. And that's why we need everybody to start talking about this. And hopefully one of our videos, not one of the videos where you predict doom and gloom, which seem to be very popular, but one of your videos where you actually give the solution, that will become popular and more people can learn.
Yeah, and the terrible thing about the despair that is a consequence of not confronting reality is that we do begin to turn on each other. Groups start blaming other groups, and they turn to violence. And that's the way societies fragment, and a lot of innocent people suffer as a consequence. So we have to persist with the insistence that there is a remedy, that we can rationally explain the chaos that's around us. But it does mean people having to have the moral courage to listen and to engage in that conversation. We don't want to be talking to each other and nobody listening. What's the point? We're wanting to contribute to a conversation that involves millions of people. But we can't force people to participate. Ultimately, it is a personal decision, the need for a commitment to self-enlightenment, to raise the hope that the future really could be better this time. After the Second World War, the socialists, the Labour parties, misled people by suggesting that, oh, well, if we have a bit of socialism, that will begin to create a better world. Well, whether it was the Soviet Union's version or China's version or the UK's welfare state diluted version, none of them has worked. The Soviet Union collapsed. The Chinese are not willing to face up to the fact that their Marxist model has broken down and they've now switched to autocracy. And the UK's welfare state is being dismissed as a failed state by more or less everybody, even socialists are admitting that ours is a failed state. We can't go through that process of self-deception again. And so the responsibility on you, Peter, and people like me, to try and keep the message of hope alive until there is a willingness for enough people to participate in a constructive way. Until that happens, we've got to keep going.
We shall keep the flame burning, Fred. I try every week to do something, and I know there's a few avid listeners who love hearing all about this, but the message of hope for this week is to keep that flame burning, because things are about to go pear-shaped, and the message must be there to pick up the pieces.
It must indeed, because what we can't have is displays of what's happening now in Iran, which has happened in Gaza, which continues in Ukraine. We can't have that happening in the UK, in Germany, Denmark, wherever, or in America, because it just doesn't bear thinking about. No. But in order to prevent that happening, we have to become informed. That's the first step.
One of the things I read this week was an interesting thing from Dubai, that already huge amounts of people were leaving Dubai before the Iran war started, before this epic fury bombs, because normal people who'd emigrated there couldn't afford the rents. The house prices had gone back to Dubai's peak. You know, they peaked in the last recession, then they crashed, and now they've peaked again. So you're peaking, people are starting to leaving. Israel has got so much property speculation from money from America and other places. They're at absolute horrendous peaks in their property prices. So certainly around the region, they're going to see a property collapse, and that's going to then spread out.
And that's just brings us back to the fundamental of economics. They went there believing that they would be able to escape high income taxes in Europe or North America, not understanding that if the tax take on their wages or profits come down, then the mechanism underlying the system means that the net gains, what they thought they were going to save on lower taxes, gets absorbed by rent. That's an automatic mechanism. It's the fundamental mechanism in the system, but it's the one that people do not want to face up to. And by failing to acknowledge that mechanism, we get what you just described for those so-called tax havens in the petrostates.
It is interesting that that is probably, and all that lost income investment is like a virus that's going to spread out through the system.
Yep.
So
onwards we fight, yeah?
Onward we fight, and we'll pick up this next week and hopefully enlighten more on what's going to happen in the economy.
Thank you, Peter. Good night.
Good night.